Hello and welcome to Leaving Nothing Undared, a podcast from Oblate School of Theology's Department of Continuing Education. I'm Antonio Frietze, your host, and I'm excited to be joined today by Nicholas Collura. He's a spiritual director, a chaplain, and the facilitator of our upcoming Advent retreat, Ancestry in the Earth, an eco-spiritual retreat. This retreat will look at the Advent season through the lens of ancestry, exploring our connection to the natural world, those who came before us, and the legacy we're shaping for those who will come after. It is a beautiful and timely way to enter into the Advent season, and I'm excited to have Nicholas here with us to talk about it. Let's dive in. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome back to the program. How are you today?
Hey, Antonio, I'm doing great. It's really nice to see you again. You and I go back a long ways, and really happy to be with the folks at Oblate again.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, we're excited for you to join us and for this conversation as an opportunity for our audience to get to know you a little better. You mentioned that you and I know each other, so I know that you're a spiritual director, a chaplain. You've been involved in eco-spirituality, both in your personal life and in your kind of organizational work. So, by way of introduction, I'd really love to hear what first attracted you to eco-spirituality, creation work, and what that involvement has been like for you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's funny because although I grew up in Massachusetts, kind of in a home in the woods with the changing of four beautiful seasons, and I think I probably had kind of a deep connection to the earth that I just absorbed without thinking about it too much. But then after college, I went and I've always lived in cities. So, in a way, this is kind of saying to any of your listeners, if you are not always going on hikes or something, don't worry. Like, if you're an urbanite like me, you're welcome to this series. And really it reawakened for me in the late 2010s, which is a very political decade. And I was kind of asking, okay, what can I do to serve my community? And I wasn't sure if there was a particular issue that I was called to work on in a community setting or advocacy setting. And then what happened was one day I was working as a healthcare chaplain, visiting people in their homes, and a patient of mine canceled, and I had some free time in the middle of the day. And I realized, oh, I was living in Philly at the time. I realized I'm nearby this Bartram's Garden place, which is kind of a green space, public green space that I'd heard about and had never spent time in. So I just drove by and went for a little walk. And it was a spiritual experience for me. It was a reconnection. Again, always living in urban spaces, not connecting very often to green spaces, and I felt this deep connection there to the point that I was kind of praying and heard this sort of inner voice say, "Would you fight for this? Would you fight for this place?" Yeah, I think inner voice, voice of God, who knows? But it was in the context of this discernment I'd been on of what could my role, what could my contribution be um, to my community. And so that led me, at first, I kind of explored some community activism around climate issues in Philadelphia, but then I felt, no, really my language is the language of faith and theology. So I said, maybe I can do something in the local archdiocese. Did a quick Google search and found out that actually the Archdiocese of Philadelphia didn't do anything around Laudato Si, which is Pope Francis's encyclical about creation care and about our spiritual connection to the earth. And I said, well, maybe I could actually start something. So, long story short, most of my work in terms of organizing in this space has been since 2019. I was the co-founder and I'm a co-facilitator of EcoPhilly, which nurtures and connects creation care teams in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And then, really, what happened there was through the process of doing that work with the blessing of the Archbishop of Philadelphia, I noticed that the work I was doing in spirituality, workshops and retreats, was becoming more and more infused with what we could call an eco spiritual dimension. So, that's a little bit about how it all unfolded.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's an experience that at least parts of it, many of us can empathize with, sympathize with, connect to that urban experience. Certainly, and I think that awareness that arises when you behold creation is an experience that truly pushes us towards the threshold of the transcendental and kind of wakes us up to our relationship with God through the lens of our relationship with all of creation. And I appreciate that you mentioned that your language was a language of faith, right? And that's how you sought to then encapsulate this relationship with creation. Now, speaking of the language that we use, the title of your retreat is Ancestry and the Earth, right? And we might be familiar with the Earth, and we understand that this is kind of a spiritual and Catholic and theological practice of retreat, but ancestry is a little less something that we hear colloquially, and it certainly sparks interest, right? I know we're giving this retreat during the Advent season, so if you could speak to a little bit of how that theme came about, what inspired it, and then how it might connect to the Advent season.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's true, it's not a super intuitive connection, ancestry and the earth. How are we connecting these two things? And maybe I can talk a little bit about how they converge from both perspectives, how experience of our connection to the earth can lead us to this theme of ancestry and vice versa. When I first started giving workshops and retreats around eco-spirituality, I remember the first one when I had an idea of what to do for an icebreaker. It was a small retreat. There were about 8 participants. I was thinking, okay, what's a good kind of getting to know you kind of question? And don't ask me how this came to me, but I had the idea to ask them to talk about their own ancestors' relationship to the earth. Maybe I figure, that's a little bit of way of saying where are you coming from as people? Where are you coming from in terms of this eco-spiritual question? And I kid you not, it was probably like a 3 hour retreat, and we wound up spending about an hour. I had planned like 10 minutes, but about an hour as people connected to their memories of being on a grandparent's farm or something. Maybe even, I think in one case, without running water, but that encouraged them to, as kids, to be playing out in the woods or something. And um, could give so many other examples, whether it's people's kind of Irish ancestry, connecting them to Celtic spirituality, which is very strong on this connection to the natural landscape. Um, but I realized that thinking back, and you don't have to go too far, just a couple generations usually, our ancestors tended to have a closer relationship to the earth than we have now. So that's how thinking about ancestry can lead us there. But thinking too about how an experience with the earth, with big nature, leads us to ancestry. I think most people, when they're in a natural landscape that's beautiful, that's majestic, often we have two experiences, maybe among others. One is a sense of our own smallness. We step into this greater world than our built environment. Maybe we connect to something like deep time. You see a tree that's been around since, longer than you have or longer than your parents have. And you feel very small standing before that reality. Um, at the same time, it can really be an experience of grandeur. You feel like you're a part of this immense web of life. So you can feel small and yet also kind of expanded paradoxically at the same time. And I think when we as human beings kind of follow that thread, what are we a part of? What is this chain that we're like little links in? We connect to some of these archetypal patterns, like I am a child of my parents. I may be a parent someday to children, or even if I'm not having biological children, I'm still a link in the chain. And it brings us back to an appreciation of, our own life is very small. But in the sweep of history, in the sweep of our family histories, we are part of a greater chain. And so I think the earth and ancestry is a little bit counterintuitive, but when we think about it, when we experience it spiritually and prayerfully, these lead us, these themes lead us to each other. And of course, Advent is a time of thinking about our origins, the origins of the Christian church. Um, it's also a time of waiting. We imagine that we are waiting for Christ coming into our lives anew every year. So it is a little bit of this looking back and looking ahead. And I think that makes it a good time to be asking these questions of ancestry and how we're a link in a chain.
Absolutely. And I love that image of a chain. And really what's coming to my mind is not just a vertical chain, but perhaps something like chain mail, because I know you stress this interconnectedness horizontally and into the future as well as into the past, right? And there's probably no image that speaks more directly to this longing, I think, that we can see present in our society, our culture, probably in ourselves for connection and for interrelatedness, right? We might witness forces that seem to be tearing this fabric, this chain link fabric of our lives and our communities apart. And I think that this offers a wonderful antidote to that kind of experience. Pushing on the retreat structure and how we're envisioning it, I know, and I want to get this right, that it's going to revolve around three sessions that you've kind of titled Invoking Our Ancestors, Learning from Our Ancestors, and Becoming Ancestors Ourselves. Without giving too much away, what might some of the participants anticipate from these sessions together?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say is it is a retreat. And so the first session, Invoking Our Ancestors, will probably involve the most amount of me talking because I'm kind of contextualizing what we're doing, but there'll be time for conversation and discussion and experience as well. So setting up some of the themes that I've begun to share with you in this video and sharing a little bit more too about why it's important that we think about ancestry as a spiritual concept. And then, really, once we've done that, once we've kind of put ourselves in this posture of remembering, imagining, can we learn something from our ancestors? And then, can we think about, again, links in the chain? How does that impact the way that we give back to generations to come? Now, what I want to say about it being a retreat is that although I'll kind of situate us in the first session, especially, um, the latter two sessions will really be more experiential. So I've got a little exercise and I won't give it away just yet, but each of those latter two sessions will be based on kind of a spiritual practice and an exercise that'll involve a little bit of reflective time for us to do it together and then a little bit of sharing. And so what people can expect is a retreat. And, these will be in the evenings, just for an hour each. So not a strenuous lift. You can come, bring a cup of tea, bring a cup of hot chocolate. We'll be in December at that point, so it'll be Advent season. Come in your pajamas if you want to, and bring a shawl or a little blanket or get comfortable on your couch. This is meant to be just kind of a time of settling in and praying and relaxing into something. So not, we do so many Zooms and it's not a webinar so much as a retreat. And there'll be times even to change, turn your camera off and just be in the exercise that I'm leading us through as the day comes to a close. So I hope it's a warm and invitational time for anyone who participates.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that it's an hour each night and truly it is. And I appreciate the familiarity with which we're invited to encounter this time together. And from my experience with you and having had conversations in the past and having had the privilege of seeing you offer a retreat last year, I know that that hour is really impactful, right? And you feel, or I have felt resonance of what's discussed and brought up in that hour into the rest of my evening, the Advent season in my practice. So it is really enriching and nourishing. And I think part of what makes it such is that we encounter these different perhaps less treaded areas of our spirituality, one of which is eco-spirituality in the Christian tradition we might not be as familiar with. And also, I think Catholics have a robust practice of Lent, but not perhaps as much of Advent. So I'm inviting, hopefully, in the lead up to this question, you to speak to again what eco-spirituality really is in our Christian conception, in the conception of this retreat, and why Advent might be an appropriate time to break open that treasure in our spirituality as appropriate to the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you too for those kind words about last year's retreat. It was really fun, and hope that this is an equally good experience for your community. Yeah, I agree with you. We think about Lent in a robust way. Advent maybe less so. I think people feel the Advent season. We don't maybe have quite as much theology around practices, or we might not think so much about what are we giving up. and unfortunately, like we talk about this every year, the consumerism of the season often kind of poaches on our spiritual energy. But when we can really tap into it, I think we experience it in kind of an innocent, intuitive way. Like we hear these Christmas carols that maybe we've known for generations. Again, there's a kind of an ancestral thing too. In the Anglo tradition, they usually come from the 19th century, but I think too from other traditions as well, whether we're doing posadas or whatever they might be, we're connecting to an ancestral tradition that, yeah, maybe we don't think so much about it, but we feel it in our bones. And I think it kind of can awaken an innocence in us. Like many of us remember our childhood of Advent being an exciting time, but probably as kids we didn't think as much about Lent. But we experienced Advent, so it's an experiential season where kind of the veil is thin between ourselves and God, between ourselves and the other world, or we're hearing these stories from the gospel that we hear since we're kids. So it's a very spiritual time. I think it's a great time for a retreat like this, actually, because again, that veil is just kind of lifted off if we really allow ourselves to sink into it, sink into our intuitive side, our innocent side. Um, and it's a great time not to think so much about theology, although I can be an intellectual person sometimes myself, but again, to connect to those rhythms of the earth, of history, of tradition, of ritual. Yeah, to really turn our socialized and thinking brains off and just experience a different rhythm. And eco spirituality ultimately is about that. I think Western Christianity has this fine tradition of theology. I am so grateful that we have Thomas Aquinas and so on, and the whole intellectual storehouse of the church. I'm grateful for that, to ask interesting questions about the world and about God. Um, and there's other parts of ourselves that we can be really divorced from. Um, we don't want to say more feminine parts of ourselves, connection to Mother Earth, just allowing ourselves to be in the womb of creation, just kind of held by the earth. So it's a good time to return with Mary in the Advent season, for example, um, to a different experience of our Christian faith, a more intuitive, more archetypal, um, and yeah, allow ourselves to connect to those rhythms. I hope that makes sense. I'm babbling a bit, but
No, no, I think it does. And one of the points that you make that I really want to stress and highlight is that we Westerns, moderns, are very cut off in some ways from our bodily experience. And as you noted again, I don't want to, over stress the kind of connection that's needed to the body because we do appreciate that we are inspirited beings, and our great treasure of theology is something that as a school of theology we treasure. But at the same time, God is fundamentally an experience, right? God is an experience, and as created beings, we experience things through our body, our created earthly body that shares a nature of matter with the rest of creation. And I think that as you're kind of bringing forth in this conversation, and as I hope will be brought forth in this retreat, getting back into our created bodies is one of the principal avenues through which we can experience the reality of God and the blessedness of all of creation in God's sight. As opposed to the very admirable and valuable practice of explaining God through theology. I think as a spiritual practice, the experience of God and our relationship to creation is what really results in a kind of um, felt reality of being loved and being blessed that I would hope is the pinnacle of what is a spiritual experience.
mhm.
Is there
Yes.
anything that you would hope that folks who choose to engage in this retreat would take away from it?
Yeah, and I think you've put it so well, actually. It's bringing that way of relating to God, that thirst for experience, and that having had an experience. And hopefully that having had an experience of the importance of one's ancestry, whether that's our biological ancestry or whether that's the heritage of our Christian ancestry and Christian family. I'll talk about both of those over the course of the retreat. Hopefully we'll get to connect to both of those. Um, as Catholics, we talk about the saints, for example, and perfect example of how, uh, okay, some people can criticize the practice of prayer with the saints to the saints as a little superstitious or something. Yeah, okay, we're not in our arch intellectual mode necessarily, but we're connecting to a story of those who have come before us and those who we believe on faith are with us still. And we might just feel that. I think many of us have an experience, whether it's one of the saints who have been named or whether it's a grandparent or parent or someone who's predeceased us. We feel a continuing bond with that person. We feel it in our heart and our soul and in our gut. Um, and, we could have an intellectual conversation about what that means and what happens to us after death and so on. But I think most of us experience it most powerfully on that intuitive level. And so I hope that by tapping into this level of reality, it'll help us to carry those ancestors with us into everything that we do as Christians and as people and families and communities. Um, I hope that'll be a gift that keeps on giving.
Absolutely. Nicholas, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for agreeing to offer this retreat this year. I know we're very much looking forward to it as an Oblate community for that opportunity to slow down, connect with where we come from, who we are, where we're going. And I'm very confident that Ancestry and the Earth is going to be a treasure for our Advent season. So thank you for bringing that to us.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for the invitation, and look forward to seeing you soon and many of our listeners as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. For our listeners, Ancestry and the Earth, an eco-spiritual retreat with Nicholas Collura will be held online Tuesday through Thursday, December 2nd through the 4th, 2025 at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. The registration cost for the entire retreat is only $60, and you can register online at ost.edu. We pray you'll join us for this incredible journey through the Advent season. Until next time, I'm your host, Antonio Frietze, inviting you to continue leaving nothing undared for the gospel. God bless you.